the mobilization has led to a lot of death, but their offensive, which is sort of having tried to satisfy the hardliners, he hasn't got much to show for it. And the CIA was saying last week that they're not convinced that he can mount yet another offensive this year, especially as Russian forces are now gearing themselves to cope with the Ukrainian offensive. It puts the origins of the war, makes it somehow NATO's responsibility, although, of course, he was the one who started it all on the 24th of February last year. And it tries to suggest that there's sort of almost a civilizational fight here, not just an existential fight for Russia to protect itself, but Russia is presented as having unique civilizational qualities that the Western global elites are trying to destroy.
And who's that speech playing to? I presume fellow Russians.
Fellow Russians. I don't think very many other people are that interested. There were a few other leaders from countries that were also part of the former Soviet Union, but nobody else. And that's why these are themes that you see recurring in Russian state media, in pronouncements, some of them even much wilder than those made by Putin.
I mean, is there any veracity to anything he has to say there? Or, I mean, perhaps the word substance would be more applicable.
Not really. It was quite a short speech. It was less than 10 minutes. And there were no positive proposals there, no suggestions about how the war is going to end, either by military means or by diplomatic means. So the main interest was actually in the parade, which, again, was a much more subdued affair than previous years. I think the main talking point is the fact that not only were there fewer fighting vehicles than normal, there was only one tank, and that was a relic of the Second World War, because all the other tanks are at the front or have been destroyed.
As you mentioned, Moscow's parade went ahead, but 21 other cities cancelled their parades, citing security concerns. How dangerous is Moscow and St. Petersburg at the moment? And is it only the Ukrainians that are creating security concerns in Russia?
Well, I mean, there is a claimed sort of Russian resistance anti-Putin group. We don't know, to be honest. The Ukrainians are doing things in Russia. They're using drone strikes against oil depots. There's been sabotage against rail networks and so on. There was this notable drone attack on the Kremlin last week, which nobody quite managed to explain exactly how this happened yesterday. All of this is pretty embarrassing. I don't think there's major security concerns. Nothing like compared with what it's like to be living in Ukrainian cities, where you get drones and cruise missiles and so on sent in your direction daily.
But what about the a reasonably large number of pro-war figures in Russia being attacked in Russia? And whilst it's normally put down to Ukrainian security forces, there has been a mysterious group claiming responsibility for some of those, Rusi report. So is there a suggestion that there may be opposition in Russia?
I think one shouldn't overstate it. There is opposition, but it's not large, and key opposition figures are either in prison or in exile.
But what about then when Prigozhin, the leader of Wagner, starts speaking out and issuing a string of expletives against those not providing weaponry and things? I mean, that suggests some kind of a power struggle going on, within those in authority.
Indeed, it does. But what's interesting is Prigozhin is representing the ultranationalists. So he's not complaining against the war. He's complaining about the way that the war is being fought. And he's careful not to attack Putin in this, though he certainly attacks people close to Putin, like Defense Minister Shoigu. Interestingly, he came in this morning, just after the parade, complaining that all the artillery he'd been promised to ammunition to take Bakhmut had not yet been delivered, and suggesting that they'd suffered some reverses. So he's in a pretty foul mood. And it does represent tensions within the elite, that's undoubted, but it's not between sort of liberal moderates and authoritarian Putin. It's between hardline Putin and even harder line characters.
And for Putin, keeping those, major powers, as it were, within his government set against each other, I suppose there are advantages to that as well.
Yes, I think there's a bit of divide and rule there. His problem is that last September, when things looked like they were going very badly after Russia had been forced to abandon Kharkiv and push back a bit in Kherson, he shifted to the right. He agreed to the full mobilization. He agreed.
Putin.
This is Putin, yeah.
Yeah.
He agreed to the full mobilization. He put in a hardliner general. He put in. He annexed 4 provinces of Ukraine in addition to Crimea. And his problem now is that he doesn't control all of those provinces. The mobilization has led to a lot of death, but their offensive, which is sort of having tried to satisfy the hardliners, he hasn't got much to show for it. And the CIA was saying last week that they're not convinced that he can mount yet another offensive this year, especially as Russian forces are now gearing themselves to cope with the Ukrainian offensive.
And just finally then, how elusive is the prospect of a victory day, for the war in Ukraine for Putin? And what's the alternative if he can't achieve that much fought for goal?
Well, it's very difficult to see how he achieves the subjugation of Ukraine, which was his original objective. He appears now to be focused on the Donbass, which is where all this started, but is struggling a bit there as well. I think the prospect is either this war dribbles on in some way or another, taking lives on a daily basis for some time, or when we see what happens to the Ukrainian offensive, you start to see some peace moves being made, possibly with the Chinese taking a more prominent role than might have been expected before.